governance. Joining us today are the director of the Global Public Policy Institute, Banner Thorsten, Hans-Peter Berghoff, professor of banking at the University of Hockenheim in Stuttgart, and Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to Dialogue. We'll start with something, of course, close to us, the Munich Security Conference, in particular the report. There's interesting theme, with lose-lose with a question mark, meaning, of course, we don't want to fall into such a trap, such a situation. Everybody loses. We used to talk about win-win. So what changed? I will start with Professor Berghoff here.
Well, for Europe, from your perspective, what changed is the Russian attack on Ukraine, which changed our view of the world fundamentally, because we became now aware of this high safety risk for Europe, and that we really must find a way through this new world of aggression. And this world of aggression is definitely a lose-lose world. It's all negative. We can cooperate and we can gain from that, but we need a solid basis. And the most fundamental base for this is peace, accepting your neighbor. Accepting the neighbor as it is, not wanting to interfere in a way which is not acceptable for your neighbor. And we're going away from that right now. And that's what has changed in Europe. Other countries in the world might have different priorities, might see this different. For us, this attack destroyed all the illusions we had about that things might go, even with tensions, with conflict, but they might go in a positive direction.
Yeah, this is a European perspective. This is a Ukraine conflict. Huiyao, your center, China and Globalization. So from Chinese perspective, from the point of view of globalization, what went wrong?
Yeah, I think the theme of the Munich Security Conference this year, particularly the report released just a few days ago, was quite interesting. And you talk about lose-lose. That's the theme of the report. And then that's really actually put people into a new angle to look at the situation. If it's a lose-lose, who lose more and who lose less? So that really means it's a counterproductive. It's really, even though some people may lose more, some people may lose less, it's really not for the whole world to benefit. We have to overcome that mentality. So I think it's really a very creative that Munich Security Conference come up with this idea of lose-lose, and then it really compares, the relatively gain of some people and relatively loss of some people. But we all have to think about the overall benefit of the mankind. And so if we look at in that perspective, if some people lose a bit more, some people lose a bit less, but at least we should avoid that, and then we should try to have more collective gains. We should make a bigger pies, and then we should really let more people enjoy it. So how to divide the pie, how to really cut the pie? Then we need a new global structure, probably new dialogues, new discussion.
Mr. Thorsten, of course, it's not only about geopolitical, not only about security. So it's also about the trade, economic relationship here. In the past, everybody believed in, say, interdependence. That's good, because interdependence ensures peace and stability. Nowadays, even interdependence produces problems. So, in your opinion, what should we do in order to achieve the goal, for example, as we all mentioned, overall benefits for everybody?
You're right. Lose-lose kind of tells us something about how Europeans see the world, that we're much more pessimistic about the world. And we also learned our lessons about interdependence. I was one of the people who believed in the benefits and the positive effects of interdependence. But I think quite a few other Europeans, we learned our lesson from Russia. We were interdependent with Russia. We needed their oil and gas, and Russia needed our money, our technology, access to our markets. We thought this interdependence is mutual and will lead to rational behavior. Little did we know that our understanding of rationality on the other side wasn't shared, and President Putin thought it's better for him to achieve his goals by going to war against Ukraine.
Professor Berghoff, globally, globalization, if you look at the situation right now, like everybody is unhappy in a sense, global Souths are not happy, it's an international order shaped mainly by Western countries. The US is not happy, or China is catching up quickly. So China would say, together with India, the big powers, they would say, we want to have our say. Europeans, obviously, with Russia not happy there. Globalization used to be the key word, the hot word, and now it's the opposite.
It is the opposite, and I think we shouldn't forget how much benefits we had and still have from globalization. I just look at a country like India. When I was younger, in India, people died of hunger. Not a few, but hundreds of thousands, and this is again. So there has been a strong economic development by a global capital market and by a globalization of the economy. And if you'd ask me what we need for Africa, we need open markets, especially for agricultural goods in the developed countries, in China, in Europe, in the United States, to get these countries from the ground to production, to get something going on. So we have a lot of advantage from this globalization against what many, especially leftish ideologists said, and also the nationalists say, we have that, we should try to regain it. But as I said, we need peace for that. And without peace, you can't do such deals with neighbors who threaten to attack major players in the game.
I have to ask you, there's a belief, people would say, if the Chinese side talk to Putin, talk to the Russian leader, and then he will stop, the military operation in Ukraine, for example, immediately. Is that the case?
Certainly, I think China can exercise influence, a lot of influence, but not as probably as easy as people thought, because China also, first of all, China has the longest border with Russia in the world. And historically, China suffered quite a bit with Russian also, but now China has done a lot of business now with Russian, and then also that China has already, I think, have gone all the way coming out. For example, when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited China, President Xi said no nuclear war should be fought in Ukraine, which is a huge message. If Russia cannot use nuclear weapons, what strength does it have? And then when President Macron visited China, President Xi said no bombing of the civilians and children or destruction of the facilities of civilians. And that also another strong message. And China sent an envoy for Ukraine and the Russian conflict. And China actually, President Xi phoned Zelensky and President Wang Yi last year, I think, met the foreign minister of Ukraine right here at Munich. So I think China has done quite a bit, but the fundamentally is now both sides, I think, needs to find is willing to talk and eager to talk. We need that moment to happen.
People would say, because of the Chinese development, China is positioned globally. People do see there's a bigger role for China to play in maintaining peace and stability. Mm-hmm. Tell us, Chinese policy in terms of global security.
I see China now actually is more complex, because China now is the largest trading nation in the world with 140 countries, the major trading partners. China now contributes over 1/3 of the global GDP growth. China still does. China maintained 5.2% GDP growth. China has become the largest clean technology developer in the world now. As I said, China, injected some initiative like Global Development Initiative. China launched a Belt and Road, which invest $1 trillion over 3,000 projects with 150 countries, which I think, of course, not every project is perfect, but most countries benefit to some extent. And I think China is trying to provide some global public goods. But of course, China is still in the curve of doing that. It's not, U.S. has been doing that for 100 years. China just starting to do probably for the last 10, 20 years. Still, we are transitioning from a unipolar world, like Olaf Scholz said, to a multipolar world, and China is trying to cope with that and learn from each other. So I think there's a lot of room for China to grow, to work with different countries, particularly our European friends and of course our U.S. counterpart. There's no trust among the major powers. We have to build up the trust. And then the exercise of Munich Security Conference is exactly doing that. Mm-hmm. Let's get the U.S. counterpart, Chinese Minister, Foreign Minister Wang, everybody comes here, talk to each other, and then have some new consensus, trust. I saw President Xi, President Biden get some trust in San Francisco last November, which is great, but we hope to get more. Olaf Scholz will visit China. This year, President Xi will visit France. Let's get more trust. And hopefully, we'll stabilize the world, and then we can get more business development.
So, Mr. Thorsten, you talked about this, learning a lesson from interdependence, and you mentioned China here. In a sense, it's really EU and China, Germany and China, of course, economically, trade and investment here. Tell us more about that.
I mean, we've seen how President Putin has tried to weaponize European dependence on gas. And unfortunately, our dependencies on China are much more complex and far-reaching than on Russia. And so we need to prepare for the day that the Chinese side could also say we weaponize these dependencies, maybe in a contingency about Taiwan. So we need to prepare. And it's actually de-risking is the same partial decoupling is actually learning the lesson from China, because it has been the Chinese approach, the aspiration. President Xi put it this way. He said, we want to make the rest of the world more dependent on us, our value chains, and we want to be less dependent on the rest of the world. And that's a smart strategy, of course. We've also woken up and we want to be less dependent.
I'd love to say also something about this kind of de-risking. Also from a perspective of control by the market and the efficiency of having a globalized world, it's better to have no dependency, because then you can react. Yeah? That means also there are more partners involved, because you ask now, can I produce this in this country, that country? I don't do everything in China, I don't do everything in the United States, I do it in many other countries. Maybe that's a little bit more inefficient because the transaction costs get higher in the economic transactions. But on the other hand, it allows us to diversify, it allows us to have more different developments in different parts of the world. It's not like what we had before, global sourcing, we go where it's really cheapest. That doesn't matter anymore. Little differences are absolutely acceptable. You've got the capacity everywhere, that's good for every country. And it also allows us, if somebody destroys peace, to react fast. Because if you destroy peace, if you start some major military operation, you will lose a lot of business very soon, because there are many others standing ready to increase the position.
Profit. Have efficiency, let's say.
Yeah, it's this kind of break of trust which is involved in this kind of military aggression gets punished faster. It's long-term more efficient.
I have a little different view, because I think we are now in the 21st century, because we can't think about what has happened in the last century or the century before, because where I think every country does its own, and and then we are not really depend so heavily on each other. But now the world has really accelerated. The globalization has been so fast, and the standardization. For example, I know that for the German industry, auto industry, for example, many other industries are in China, and China is the biggest automobile market in the world, with 400 million automobiles currently running in China. And each year they produce 30 million. And then BMW and Mercedes-Benz, they sell more cars in China than US and EU combined. And the reason that they have to be in China is because China is the state of the art of the automobile technology. And by being in China, they harness the best technology, and then they can sell to the world. So it doesn't have to be doing business in your own country. You can do business in other places. I agree we need to have a secure, more peaceful environment. And that's where I think the business should do more now. We should not let politicians, jeopardize like Putin, like all those people. Because business should push forward for a more stable and more predictable, peaceful environment. I think the business is not doing enough. They are reaping the benefit of globalization, but not doing enough to push the politicians to create a more stabilized world. And that's why we're having those war narratives, is really, risk narrative is really getting all-time high, and then scare all the people out of the market, which is exactly like this Munich Security Report said, lose-lose. Everybody lose it. And then by everybody losing it, we're getting into more impoverished, more poor, more dismantled world. And then we may get more anger, more deglobalization, more populism. We may have more war. Trump may come back again. And then we may have a more miserable world. So it really, we have to, at this threshold, crossroad, we need to really push for globalization and maximize the benefit
We say the economy should do more. I mean, there's nothing like the economy. There are people in the economy who might do something about it. For me, in Germany, I see that the economy tells a lot of things and the government does the opposite.
Yeah.
Which is not good for the country, because often there are very sound economic reasons behind what the economy, so the representatives of the economy say. Do you think that the politicians will listen to what the economy says anymore?
To your question about this, local politicians, whether they are correspondents to local reality, I think the world has changed so much. I mean, the old way of, the Biden's simple view, autocracy versus democracy is not really working, because even for democracy, it needs to be upgraded. It's evolved from the Athens, Greeks public square democracy in the old days, 1 man, 1 vote. But now you have a social media, you have all kinds of things happening. The world changing so fast, and then you got so many polarized politics. You got, you look at the U.S. now. I mean,
you can't look at Germany as well, by the way.
No, that's not a good example for other countries, developing countries, global south to follow. I mean, it doesn't work that well as they used to be a simple economy, whereas there's no social media, no fake news, that kind of interference. So I think democracy has to evolve. So in that sense, China has done some experiment on consultative democracy, on meritocracy. China always has some kind of democracy, thousands of years. Every year, like for example, 12 million college graduates get into the system through the exam voting papers. 2 million college graduates get into the public servant system through the voting of the exams. So it's also a kind of elite democracy to some extent.
But in your constitution, it says it's the dictatorship of the party.
Well,
right, and that's a very peculiar form of democracy.
No. I think there wasn't it wasn't probably translated well, but it basically means one party, a consistent party role, because like even in Japan, it's always a liberal party. You have a different system. There's always one party. In Singapore, it's always one party. But one party doesn't mean you can't now do good things if it really, self-balance and checks and everything's in place. And also that gives the continuity, one 5-year plan after another 5-year plan, so China can build the 2/3 of a global speed railway and 70% the global 5G system, because under one party, consistent management. So it's just different country system, different culture, different system.
I think to keep the competition peaceful, that has to be the goal. That great power competition doesn't spiral into great power war, and that we have to build the trust. I think we need to reduce the mistrust by partly talking to one another, but partly also reducing vulnerabilities, because if you don't trust the other side, you cannot be too vulnerable. And I think both sides are doing this. So
I agree.
To a degree, the de-risking could stabilize relations.
It's a good point. Instead of in the process of de-risking, both sides suffers or loses, in that situation. Come back to the more security situation, like in Ukraine or in the U.S. in particular. Recently, Trump said he would not offer protection if countries here does not raise their defense budget to a certain degree. There, they even encourage Russia to attack certain countries there. There's also real prospect of him coming back to the White House. What do you make of the second term of Donald Trump? What kind of impact he will have, or his presidency will have, on relationship between Europe and the U.S.? Will that make Europe more independent, strategic autonomy as said by the French?
First of all, it will make us vulnerable, because vis-a-vis the U.S. over the past 10, 15 years, we've lost relative power. The U.S. has grown economically. We haven't in relative terms. We haven't reduced our security dependencies. It would, of course, be the final wake-up call that Europe needs to get serious about investing in its own military and its own defense, that we need to kind of make the necessary resources. We're a rich continent. We have the technology. We can do it. But so far, we've been reluctant to do it because it was pretty convenient to have the U.S. with extended security guarantees, and we also had a much more benign reading of the environment we were in. So, but it will be extremely uncomfortable for Europeans if Trump gets back, and extremely turbulent.
What about the Ukraine situation?
What about the Ukraine? I mean, the Ukraine situation right now is already getting worse because the US political system cannot agree on replenishing ammunition stocks, whereas Mr. Putin has good agreements with North Korea and keeps the ammunition going, and Europeans haven't kind of kept up their production domestically. So it's already difficult. It will get a lot more difficult likely get more difficult if Trump gets in. So it's uncomfortable for Europeans, to say the least, and it's maybe the final wake-up call. We need to get serious about our own security.
Professor Berghoff, in that respect, what about the trade and investment relationship between the European Union and the US? For example, there's competition. Let's say green products, or in industrial policies, subsidies. For example, they are not agreeing with each other entirely in that respect. There are trade disputes. Right?
Yeah, still trade disputes. The biggest one is about the role of the state, because the United States, despite its seemingly capitalistic underlying, gives a big role to state investment right now. So they have a tremendous program of subsidies, which we cannot cope with, and we don't want to cope with, because it would mean we have so much debt in the future. So we are somehow paying out the future of our children, because we create such a high load of debt. So we must cope with that. Up to now, the effect is not as strong as many in the economy said, because many of the people from the economy in Europe said, yes, Europe must also scale up its subsidies so we can cope with the United States, we can compete with the United States. The truth is, for Europe, it's more about efficiency, about bureaucracy, about the inefficiency of bureaucracy, of all the different objectives you have. Our processes are much too slow, so we have to work on that. That's a better program, and it doesn't cost money. It just
I think we need to do all that in terms of completing the single market, less bureaucracy and all that. But I think your view, I'm a little skeptical, because in a world where not only the US is spending massive amounts on kind of developing its industry toward a zero carbon future, China is doing the same. And we're the only market that is open. For example, to Chinese electric vehicles, the US has said 25% tariff, maybe we even increase it, plus we put security requirements in the future on Chinese EVs, basically closing the market. The only market that is open right now to Chinese EVs, that is truly open, is the European market. Our consumers may get cheap cars that are connected through their electronic devices to Chinese producers, but our producers will lose out in this competition. I think we need to adjust to this competition, and if Europe plays by the old rules in a new world, I think we will lose.
Lastly, on this topic of lose-lose, avoiding a lose-lose situation, I want your solution for every country. Free solution, important solution, valuable solution. I will start with Bill.
Yeah, no, I just want to get back to the question about Trump. You said if he gets back. I think he has a very high probability to come back. And that creates a lot of uncertainty. But then there's some new new momentum probably he's coming back would bring in. For example, I see better EU-China relation, because EU will felt there's a trust with Trump will be in problem, and then China probably still a reliable partner to work with, at least economically. So that we see. I see probably Trump gets better relation with President Putin, and that will make China more worrisome, and then that probably also going to happen. And but in terms of what would be the lose-lose, how to conclude on that, I really think this Munich Security Conference, the theme this year report, is setting a new momentum into thinking. Is that we have to think about what are the what are the common benefit of us all. If we all think about the de-risk, the couple, we'll get into lost position and then really benefit nobody. So if we think about that case, just turn the coin around, we're not talking about win-win, but let's talk about lose-lose. People just realize, oh, gee, if I can't win, I don't want to lose. And then nobody wants to lose. Then let's really work together. Let's put them into one circumstances, work together. And then they really found a way to do it. So I think by having Trump there, bring a lot of uncertainty, you give more urgency for China, EU, and of course the vast global South to work together. We don't want to disrupt it by populism, nationalism. We want globalization, inclusive globalization, continue. And that's really the solution.
Mr. Thorsten?
I wouldn't necessarily bet on Mr. Trump leading to better EU-China relations. Remember the first term of Trump. Yes. It was the fruits of Chinese diplomacy were such that EU-China relations at the end of Trump term were worse than at the beginning. So I wouldn't necessarily bet on EU-China relations.
I do think if before Trump left, if not because of this EU follow the US sanctions, we already reached a comprehensive agreement on investment, and then that 7 years of negotiation would be now fruitful for both continents, and so you will see actually Trump does produce closer. Trump also produced the RCEP that China agreed with ASEAN. That was during this transition time. So who knows? I mean, Trump may come back and say phase 2, phase 3, continue to talk with China too. We don't know. Yeah.
But you may surprise it. But you could surprise it, and maybe that would also stabilize relations if you made a real, true gesture, for example, on the side of the Chinese president to really lean in on the Russian leadership to actually come together, have this 7-party talks about an end to this to this war and get serious about this. That could be a possible opening for a future that is not a future of great power or war, but of peaceful coexistence of great powers competing with each other peacefully. But right now, I'm afraid we're on a different trajectory of less trust and less cooperation.
More pessimistic. And Professor Berghoff?
I think what we need right now, because there are many global risks right now of that type, we need blunt speech. We have to really tell each other what we expect, what we think about each other, what we can do. So the red lines are clear, and this blunt speech must be, how should I say, reliable. It's not a Putin style of blunt speech. You must act accordingly afterwards. You should lie to your partner. It's good if we talk very clearly about what happens at the moment, what we expect, and that's the good thing about a talk like that. This is, I hope, a very, 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 very small part of this blunt speech that we can learn about the different perspectives and make better understanding so that the world doesn't stumble into the catastrophe as it has done quite often, unluckily already.
Yeah, more dialogues, more discussion with good faith. And the good thing is we are awake. We are not sleepwalking, so hopefully we can avoid it. Thank you for joining us, your time and insights.